a LitHub Radio podcast.
Hello, journeymen and journeywomen, endurers, white knucklers, and trad publishing hopefuls. Welcome back to Right Minded, where this week's episode with our guest, agent and author Kate McKean, is all about her new book and getting published, how to get published. The book is called Right Through It, but it just as easily could have been called You're Going to Have Feelings About Publishing. The book is a template for how to navigate the world of traditional publishing. And because Kate is an agent, I really do get her work life. So Grant, I want to kind of get us into this world of book publishing and agenting and editors and publishers. We're all on the receiving end of authors' feelings, and there are always a lot of them. And it's a book for writers and authors, but at the same time, it's also a window into her world and what it's like for agents and editors. And so if you're curious about that, you'll definitely want to read this book. Grant, I thought we'd use my alternative title as the theme of this week's show and just kind of get into our feelings a little bit. You do a good job of sharing your feelings about writing and publishing, and you've had some really brave Substacks recently, basically ranging on topics from vulnerability to rejection to your series about what it means to write with love, which was inspired by our talk with Edwidge Danicat. So I want to start here by asking you about your, the role feelings play in your publishing journey. And would you say that you have more positive feelings, more negative feelings, more neutral feelings? And, how does this industry make you feel?
Like I got a lot of feelings, all those feelings all at once sometimes.
Totally.
It's like such an interesting and actually a really timely question. And I say that because I went to a party a couple nights ago, and it was the 30th anniversary party for San Francisco's Writers Grotto. And what struck me was just how much warmth and belonging I felt. I saw people I hadn't seen in years, and it felt like they were my family. And I met wonderful new writers, and I was just kind of so uplifted and buoyant afterwards, because I was with my people. But I've only felt that way, somewhat recently. I remember going to a grotto party in the 90s, I think, or the early 2000s, and someone came up to me and they asked, "What are you doing here?"
Oh, geez.
And it felt like a confrontation, like I was an interloper. I wasn't supposed to be there. But, honestly, I could have been projecting that because at the time I didn't realize how insecure I was as a writer and how much envy and social awkwardness and other things were welling up inside me and kind of coloring my view of everything. And, I've always felt a little bit like an outsider, or a lot like an outsider sometimes, because I come from this dinky town in Iowa and I didn't have any connection to publishing and few publishing credits at that time when I went to that party. And, it seemed like everyone but me had it all figured out. They were all publishing and they were kind of glamorous writers. So going to a party like that then was a real, self-confrontation. And so I'd actually say that story encapsulates how I feel about everything in the world of writing and publishing. I'm an outsider who now feels good about being a little bit on the inside, but getting to the inside took definitely a few decades of hard work, and that hard work on the page led to hard work off the page and hard work on myself, I suppose. And I think every writer has to go through that hard work to feel a sense of belonging. We all basically need writer therapy.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. And I've said that many times in classes that I teach, especially to memoirists, that writers really do need to be in therapy when they're writing their books. But honestly, leading up to publication and post-publication is even worse in terms of the anxiety that it tends to elicit from writers. One of the things that I really like about Right Through It, Kate's book, is how relatable it is. She's an agent and she's been at this for a long time. And I've been at this for a long time too, as an editor at traditional houses for 13 years. And now I've been a publisher for 13 additional years. And working with authors is really one big feeling fest. And you do have to navigate that well and often figure out where to put other people's feelings if you're going to survive in one of these author-facing roles. And I would say that the number one feeling I encounter authors having is disappointment. Kate writes about expectations, which isn't a feeling, but it is something that influences feelings. And so if you have unmet expectations, you can feel anything from unworthy to not good enough to embarrassed. But some authors also turn unmet expectations into anger and bitterness and resentment. And of course, authors have positive feelings too, self-fulfillment and appreciation for themselves and stuff like that. But that's usually, not going to be the center of a book about how to navigate the publishing industry because it's not as common. But no matter what there are feelings, and some writers navigate getting published well and some don't, and some do well and not so well out there like at the same time, because there are pitfalls and freak out moments along the way. It's not linear. And so as an editor and a publisher, I've learned to have good boundaries over these years with authors. Like really, I do actually have to protect myself sometimes from authors' feelings. And sometimes when I feel authors' feelings seep into the work that we're doing, I will just name it. And sometimes, Grant, I've even told authors, gently, of course, but that they should consider seeking therapy. And I think naming it and just saying, look, this is really hard and you're not alone will help the author to know that their feelings are real. And it can also be a way to channel those feelings somewhere appropriate. And I think that Kate's book can really help with that too.
Well, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about these stories, writers and their feelings, I guess.
Another good book title.
Yeah, writers and their feelings. But, I think, I don't know, writers, I'll just make a sweeping blanket statement that yeah, we do get extremely caught up in our feelings, and it makes us kind of myopic, and we forget that there are other people who also have feelings that are around us, such as editors and agents. And so I'm just kind of curious about how feelings have shown up for you and how people in the work in the industry and how they interface with other feelings.
I mean, I'll start with a positive story, because some of my She Writes Press authors, for instance, deal with their feelings by naming them, like I said, like sharing them on social media, getting it out of their systems, saying something online and then being validated that that's common can be very positive, a good way of dealing with feelings. Like I remember seeing Susan Ito, who we had on the show recently. She shared on Facebook that she was feeling very exposed after her memoir came out. And she got so many comments and notes of encouragement. Similarly, I have authors who show up to my weekly office hours, sometimes just naming their feelings, like fear of outcome, letdown, anxiety. And at least I can say to them, you're not alone. And it really is good actually to name those feelings. One of the less great experiences that stands out to me about author feelings was during my time at Seal Press. I had an author who I would describe as needy to go, from the get-go. She was that way. And that manifested in like fishing for compliments and just kind of exhausting me emotionally, because I was trying to edit her book and she would, say things constantly like, is it any good? Is anybody going to care about it? Like just to an extent that was overkill, And then out of the blue, her agent called me and I quote, she basically was like, she's not feeling the love. And could I please do more? And what this implied to me was like on an emotional level, I was supposed to be supporting her, which is not the work of an editor. And so I said no. I just flat out said to the agent, like, that's actually not my job. And the author needs to look for that kind of affirmation elsewhere, because yes, I'm giving her a positive reinforcement, but it's not actually my job every single time she needs a compliment or a pat on the back to, keep doing that. That's what coaches are for. That's what therapists are for. And so that author should have been in therapy, and it's not a judgment. I really think all writers should be in therapy, and Kate says that too, so find a therapist. That's the theme of the show. But it gets back to feelings, because I do think that Kate really nailed this one. It is half the journey, truly. Grant, I want to turn this back to you a bit. Basically from the author side, could you unpack some of the feelings you've had about your publishing journey? And I was thinking notably about the disappointment of not selling the rejection book, the rejection of not selling the rejection book, right? And Kate gets into rejection too. So, we really do put ourselves through the ringer.
Definitely put ourselves through the ringer. And I think there's like not enough attention on the feelings part of it. Like you said, it was 50% of it all, and it easily is. And that's basically why I wrote this book on rejection, or a book proposal. But I was in a, kind of a peculiar position, as it turned out, because I had 3 different editors at different houses who wanted to publish it. And then they took it to the vetting stage, and each time it was rejected by the editorial board. So I kind of got my hopes up, and then they were dashed. And each time I thought it was going to make it through. And I'm sure I was frustrated and a little down, but right now I don't remember that so much, simply because I've been through so much rejection as an author. So I even sort of expect it. I'm really surprised when I'm not rejected, actually. So that said, I feel like they just weren't getting the book. which I still believe in. And I was frustrated with what I thought was an unimaginative perspective on a book that was outside the boundaries of other creativity books. But I also had to step back and wonder if there was something I could have done better in the book proposal. Their rejections opened up a time of questioning and exploration for me, which is one of the messages of my book. And I think the odd thing about being a writer, like you said, yeah, we really put ourselves through the ringer. We go out on a limb, and in the case of novels, you write them on spec, so you can spend years and years writing a novel, and then you just enter into this labyrinthine world that's hard to understand and penetrate, and you invite rejection into your life in a way that most other people don't. I could have chosen another profession, one where I didn't make myself so regularly open to rejection. But, by being writers, we're choosing to kind of exponentially add rejection to our lives. And in some ways, it's kind of a crazy decision to be a writer because of that kind of guaranteed rejection that's just embedded in your life. So Brooke, on that note, I wanted to ask you your thoughts about what this book has to offer writers who are done with traditional publishing, who've gone as far as they can go, since Kate's book is only focused on traditional publishing and you're so ensconced in indie publishing.
I think the book is an invaluable roadmap for authors who want to traditionally publish, of course, but it will still be helpful even to authors who aren't there yet or authors who are past it, because I do think that so many are. There are lots of people who are just either opting out or aren't going to get traditionally published. But it's really helpful to know all parts of the industry, and she does give you a lot of that. I also particularly like that all the permission giving she does in this book, which is for any writer at any stage, like permission to write and permission to feel their feelings, obviously, permission to give up, permission not to sweat the small stuff. So that I really, really liked. There was this great part of the book, kind of going back to this whole thing about therapy and not relying too much on your editor or your agent to be your therapist. She writes, you can absolutely vent, rejoice, worry, mull, question anything and everything with your team, but they're not going to be able to fix your abandonment issues or chronic anxiety. It can be hard to navigate this, but such is life. You won't be alone no matter what you're going through. So I think what we're speaking to, what I'm sharing, what Kate clearly is articulating in this book is like, we feel a lot of that. We vet a lot of author anxiety. And it is a roller coaster ride, so to Kate's credit, I will say she gives a giant caveat at the front of the book that this is not a book about self-publishing and indie publishing. And so since this is my space, I guess the only counter I have to this is that personally, I do think it's essential that writers know and understand that if they can't sell their book to an agent or a publishing house, that getting their work published alternatively, meaning not traditional, is better than just giving it up, or turning your attention to the next book. And I obviously know from experience that not all books are going to get traditional deals. And I would hate to see writers shelf their books because they don't get an agent or a bite from a traditional publisher. That's just my ethos.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And unfortunately, we're living in this glorious age where so many pathways are available to us. And just want to mention that one solution I have for my forlorn rejection book is to turn it into a Substack newsletter and to essentially, write it through weekly posts. And I feel like I can build an audience for it and possibly make a little money through subscriptions and then publish it in book form later. And I even think the book might be more creative if I wrote it like this, just because I'd have this kind of weekly pressure to think about a new topic and explore different things. So, again, I think rejection can open doors, and while traditional publishing can put you in a kind of very dependent and needy role, choosing other options can give you more agency.
Totally. And on that note, Grant, let us turn our attention to Kate and to feeling the feelings and to acknowledging that this publishing thing is just rife with feelings. It just is. So we're going to get into it. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We have Kate McKean with us today. Kate is a literary agent at the Howard Moorheim Literary Agency in Brooklyn, New York. She was an adjunct professor at New York University for over a decade and earned her MA in fiction writing at the University of Southern Mississippi. Her work has appeared in Poets and Writers, Electric Literature, Catapult, and elsewhere. Importantly, she writes the Agents and Books newsletter at agentsandbooks.com. And Kate is also the author of Write Through It, An Insider's Guide to Publishing and the Creative Life, which is coming out this June and available for pre-order now. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're thrilled. I want to start with running past you an alternative title to your book, because it is called Right Through It. But Grant and I were thinking that it could have just as easily been called You Will Have Feelings About Publishing.
Oh, yeah. We went through so many titles and feelings were definitely in the mix of the big, long list.
Yeah, because, your existing title speaks to the premise of your book that the only way out is through, but You Will Have Feelings is good too, because you really have written a book that encourages authors to know and deal with the fact that there's just going to be a heck of a lot of feelings on this journey. So tell us why you framed so much of this book around feelings.
That's a good question. I wrote about feelings because I think nobody's really talking about them. And we can talk about how to write a query letter till we're blue in the face. And it's like, great. And there's some ways you can do it that are better than the others. And but I was getting tired of writing about query letters. And I was having my own feelings about being a writer and being an agent at the same time. And I wanted to talk about them and normalize them because we all have them. And we're all in these tiny little bubbles by ourselves at our desks, writing in our own little documents, and nobody wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to talk about it.
Well, Kate, this book is written for authors who want to traditionally publish, and you write that traditional publishing means the big five publishers, which are Penguin, Random House, Hachette, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, and Macmillan, as well as, the other, what you call mid-major publishers, which are, usually located in New York, and you're published by Simon & Schuster. So clearly they saw a need and you saw a need for deeper education about this very specific route to publishing. So I was just wondering why, getting into the bigger, why did you want to write this book?
I wanted to put it all in one place. All this information that an author needs at various times, it's scattered across the internet in lots of different places. My newsletter, many other newsletters, member blogs, Tumblrs, and the Whisper Network, or my friend wrote a book 25 years ago, this is how it worked for them. All of this is spread out all across where any writer might look for information. And I wanted to put it in one place. And then that is working on the newsletter. I still do it twice a week. I will continue to do it. But sometimes you need a thing to grab off your desk. And it's like, what was that thing about royalty statements again? And what was that thing about this and that? And I wanted something that people could flip through or search through the time they need it. And the search functionality on newsletters is not great.
No.
And this will have an index. And I also wanted more runway to talk about things more in depth, because nobody wants to read 4,000 words in a newsletter twice a week. So I needed space in the book sense.
Yeah, I always make the point there's always going to be room for books for so many reasons, even as amazing as Substacks and newsletters are. And after feelings, I thought another big theme of your book is permission. You give authors permission to feel those feelings, but also a lot of other things, to write, not to sweat the small stuff. I loved not spending specific time on researching agents and trying to cater to them. And so I thought that all of that is really important to writers who are trying to find their way. It's hard to get writers not to hand wring, maybe impossible. And I feel like you're really trying to give readers permission to have fun. So could you say a bit more about why all of this permission giving was important to you? And if you have a case study to share about an author, who's maybe better or worse at that, I'd love to hear it.
Oh, I don't know. Let's see. I think all authors see, and I'm included in this, is the big hits. We see the list, we see the fancy covers and the sprayed edges and the big tables full of books at Barnes & Noble, and we see the big deals getting announced in the trades, and we do not see all the authors who don't get agents and don't get their queries picked up and write 7 books before they sell one, like I did. And we don't see that because no one wants to trumpet their failures, because they think that the stink of failure will never leave them. Nobody wants to look like they're failing. Nobody wants to be like, wow, maybe I'm not that great of a writer. But we need to share this stuff so that people see that it's normal to get a bunch of rejections. And I wanted to give writers permission to admit their quote unquote failures, or to admit that something worked or something didn't work, or that they don't know something, because that's true. That's That's what everybody is going through. That is the most common experience in writing than the 6-figure deals and the hitting the list and the blah, 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 blah. Like that's the exceptions to all the rules. That's not the norm. We're not going to get that. Most of us.
It's a great observation. So many people operate with the exceptions, not the other, as you're saying. And I loved your part in the book where you write about the difference between gut and fear. And you write, it takes practice to trust your gut. And I love thinking about that. And you even included a helpful chart in your book to try to help writers distinguish between gut and fear. So how do you cultivate this practice? And what do you recommend writers do when they hear messages bubbling up and they maybe think that their fears or their gut speaking to them?
Number one, therapy. That always helps. Maybe that's where it helped for me the most. Listen, the practice is the practice. The practice is writing all the time. The practice is trying to edit all the time. You're not going to run a marathon the first time you lace up your shoes. So you gotta go in there and you got to put in the miles. And then you have to be honest with yourself. And it won't be just in your chair writing. It's going to be like, oh, you're in this party and you think everybody hates you. They don't. That's just how people feel. These are all the feelings that we're chewing on as people in the world. If you notice those patterns for yourself in social situations or outside of your writing life, they're the same ones happening in your writing life. Like you're not the worst writer in the world. You're just insecure like the rest of us. And we're all doing that. And so general self-awareness will help in that. And then just practicing and writing and writing and writing and editing and editing and editing so that you can see your own patterns, because you can only see the pattern when you do it a bunch of times.
Yeah, such a good observation. There's so much truth. I mean, I'm just like, I work with authors in a similar way that you do, of course. And so I was nodding along as I was reading this and felt it's actually like a good take on what it feels like to, work in the industry, basically, whether you're an agent or an editor or even a publisher. And I stopped for a beat when I read this line, "No one is going to steal your work." It's a subsection in your book. And I was thinking we probably live in the same circle of hell with this question and concern from writers. And so much of your book is an attempt to back writers off ledges, from which they tend to perch on this very anxiety-fraught journey. So what's your theory about why this stealing of work is such a huge concern? And I think also more generally, I'm curious what you think writers will gain from understanding what the industry does, behind the scenes.
I think writers are worried people are going to steal their work is because it's so precious to them. Yeah. And they also are convinced of their own genius, which, yes, we're all geniuses and all of our stories are unique butterflies that'll never happen again and all these things. And they're distrustful of the publishing machine because they don't know anything about it. And it's those things go hand in hand. It's like as soon as you realize that a literary agent is not this terrifying monolith that's going to ruin your life if you have a typo. I'm just a person with a job who likes books. Like that's literally it. And I have power and I have authority and I have an experience and I have privilege and I have those things that I've gained and some of those things were given to me. But I'm not magical. So and I'm not this horrible monster that wants to make your life hard, And so when I talk to people in person at conferences or whatever, and I'm a 5'2", 45-year-old white lady, I'm just like the scariest person in the world, and I'm like, not, and I try to be like, I'm so terrifying, aren't I? And, then they say I'm not. But writers are terrified in general because they don't understand what's going on. And so then I want to tell people what's going on, that the publishing is a business. We are making books as much as we are making cereal boxes or boxes of cereal. Like in lots of ways, that's not different. And when you think of it that way, it can take a lot of the sting out of rejection, and that it's not a value judgment. It's just, can we sell it? And sometimes the answer is no. And sometimes the answer is no, we can't sell your really, really, really good book. Mm-hmm. It sucks. And with more information, there's more context for that decision. And then you can take it a lot less personally. And then you realize no one's going to steal your work. It's just not a thing.
Kate, I'm kind of a professional student of rejection, so I appreciate your take on it. And I want to probe a sentence in your book. The primary way to handle rejection is to remember that it's the agent, not you. And I actually recently shopped a book proposal that was about rejection, and it almost got published a few times, but it got rejected. And so I've been actually thinking about recasting it as a Substack newsletter. But anyway, I know how much it stings as an author, and I've thought about it a lot. But one thing that I hadn't thought of when I started the book is my agent said you should have a section on agents and editors because they also get rejected. And it's important for writers to know that and know what's going on with them. So I'm curious, what's your experience of rejection on behalf of the authors whose books you can't place?
I get rejected 90% of the time, 99% of the time. I can't sell a book to more than one editor. So only one person is going to buy the book in the end. And if we're very lucky, then there's more than one editor who wants the book. But the vast majority of the times I sell a book, it is one person loves it and buys it. And that's good, normal. Some people, maybe they think it's most important to go with an agent who has an auction for every single book. And like, okay, you can choose that if that's your priority, but that's not how my career has played out. And so if I send a book to 20 people, I'm going to get up to 19 rejections or 20. And I have to then synthesize these rejections and give them to my darling, sensitive, wonderful, perfect clients. And sometimes I mean, they get to see all the notes. If there are notes from a rejection, I'm not editing them for my authors my clients unless they ask me to. So they get a big email at the end of a submission with all the notes in it. And some people don't want to read that, and some people do. And it's not fun. But I hope to, like, when I talk my clients through this, to be like, listen, take all the compliments to heart and forget everything else. If it was a real actionable editorial note, if somebody is like, oh, I didn't believe the characters, or, oh, this and that, the other, and they wanted to engage in that conversation, we'd already be talking to them. Maybe they just wanted to give the tiniest little bit to say, yes, I read it, I engaged with it. I have to say something to you. That's probably what it is. But also, editors do not have to layer on the praise in a rejection. And so anything they're saying, they're like taking extra time out of their day to be like, I loved the setting, I loved the characters, I loved this. And it's sincere, because they could just be like, oh, thanks for sharing this with me, Kate. It wasn't for me. Thanks a lot. Hope to talk to you later. Bye. That's a perfectly fine rejection to get. It's frustrating, but that's what they could do.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's great advice too, just to take the positive stuff, but it's so not human nature. You also write about what happens when writers get an agent, but not a book deal. And you quote Simon & Schuster senior editor Yadon Israel, who says, writers don't understand that an agent is but a means to a deal, and getting a deal is a means to getting published. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this, because you follow up that quote by saying that if your sights are only on the agent, that might be all you get. But of course, sometimes books just don't sell, as you've said, as we all know. And so what happens when you can't sell a book for your client? Do you hope to see their next book? And do you give them recommendations for what they might do with the book that you can't sell?
Oh, yeah. When I sign up a client, the thought is we're going to work together until the cows come home, or like I'm all in. And some authors have one book and that's all they're going to do. And that's fine. I'm not going to try to pull a book out of them that they don't want to do. And some agents will work on a single book contract with a client, and that would be known upfront and agreed upon and all that. But when I sign up a client, I think they're good in some way. I think that they've got something to say, and I like the way they're saying it. And so I assume we're going to go off into the sunset together. If a book doesn't sell, we do a little postmortem. We talk about it and we say, okay, well, I guess, I really liked this part, but the market isn't there, or blah, blah, blah. And I say, what do you want to do next? Because I want what the author wants next, not what I think I can sell. Or like not a magical, this is trending, write a romantasy, if I thought the author had some interest in that area or skills, or they knew something specific, hey, remember you were posting about this thing on Instagram, tell me more about that or whatever, then that could be something that finds purchase. But nothing is worse than being asked to write a book you don't want to write. And in desperation, if a client is desperate to sell a book, which I have been there personally, and I have had clients who've been there, I'll just tell me what to write. I'll write anything. Just tell me. It is one of the worst places to be as a writer, just because you're desperate. It's not your idea. It's not your heart. You got to spend years with this idea and talk about it. And maybe there is something good in my stack of ideas that's right for a person, but I'm not handing them out like candy just because I have like a client on deck with something to do, so, or time for something to do. So it's a conversation, and I find it's much more fruitful for the client to be like, I really wanted to write this book about narwhals. And I'm like, cool, tell me more. What is there to say more about narwhals? So I find more interesting things in that conversation than have you thought about writing a mystery?
Okay, in your book, you provide such a wonderful bunch of query letters, and you actually critique those letters, and I think they are really invaluable and worth the book on their own, worth the price of the book on its own. So I was curious to know if they're real letters that you altered, and do you do query letter critiquing either as a consultant or on your Agents and Books Substack?
Those are 100% fictional. I wrote them completely query letters because I would not include a query letter from a person, even with permission in a way. I mean, like maybe I would only include somebody else's query letter if I thought it was superlative, if it was the best query letter in the entire world, because otherwise it feels like very punching down, so those are 100% fake, written specifically to illustrate points that mirror things I have seen in query letters. I don't do any query letter critiques as a consultant or on Substack. I used to. I had this thing called the 50 Queries Club, where if you had sent out 50 queries and you hadn't gotten a nibble, like show me your query letter. It was very popular, but it was too much. It takes so much time and brain power to critique a query letter at that level to be useful, that I just couldn't fit it into my schedule anymore, unfortunately. I might do query critiques at conferences in that way, but I don't do any extra consultations on the side or anything like that.
Well, Kate, we wanted to be sure to end today's interview on your Substack to encourage our listeners, of course, to follow you at Agents and Books. And you have a big following over there. And you're known for being encouraging and pulling back the curtain on book publishing. And of course, that's a lot of what you're doing in this book as well. What's been the most rewarding part of doing your Substack?
Oh, well, the community has been really great. I get really great feedback. I get great comments. I get a lot of supportive comments. I mean, everybody's really nice to me. and
thank God.
I know. I don't get trolls really. And I think I'm getting back what I'm putting in. I think I'm purposely positive. I'm purposefully kind of real talk. I'm purposefully I'm going to giving warnings, being like, okay, guys, this is going to be tough, but you're going to need it to hear this, whatever tough love I have to say. And I think I get that back. And it's been rewarding to go, 6 years of writing this twice a week.
Wow.
And still be excited to do it. And I get to do whatever I want, which is kind of the reason I both have this job and all my writing jobs. And I just want to tell people how to have a writing career. And that's it. It's just not complicated. So it's been gratifying. It's just been gratifying to keep doing it.
That's great. Well, congratulations on all things, and thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks so much. It was a great time.
Thank you so much, Kate. We'll be right back with this week's Substacking.
Well, Grant, like I said, reading Kate's book for me was really a kind of aligning experience in the sense that I felt like I was reading about someone who basically lives my same life with authors, just from a different side of the industry. So for Substack today, I'm pulling up a post I wrote last October called The Anti-Climax of Becoming an Author: Why Publishing a Book Will Turn You into an Emotional Wreck for a Time. And it covers a lot of the same ground as Kate's book, actually. I wrote in that post, there are many reasons beyond fame and accolades, sales, and money that writers publish their work, of course, but hope and desire and ambition are in the mix. Also, these feelings should be present. They're part of the fuel that gets us to the finish line, and the hangover is real. So, Grant, I wanted to talk about the publishing hangover for just a second. What is it, and how long does it last?
Sometimes a lifetime, I think. But yeah, I guess to define it, it might be a state of exhaustion. You know, almost every writer I talk to hates the promotion stuff, you know, whether it's posting on social media or going on a book tour. And so many are happy when they're done and they can rest, except that you still have all of this worry about whether the book is selling or how it's being received, or if you could do more for it. So I think it's just a state of insecurity and exhaustion, and it can easily last a few months, especially if you're being traditionally published, you know, because that's the first season of the book. That's when your book really, it's the only chance it gets to kind of make a statement. And that's the tough thing about traditional publishing. You get this incredibly small window to make a splash, but your splash is so dependent on other factors, such as your marketing budget. It's just so tough to sell a single book, because you're not only selling the book, you're selling the time it takes to read the book. So, Brooke, what I like about your post that you wrote is that you do give authors ideas for how to handle the letdown. So do you want to say anything about what those things are?
Yeah, I mean, I just asserted 3, and I'm sure there are more. So number 1 was slow your roll. Number 2 was to dream into your next project. And number 3 was to give it time, you know, so that if you're feeling like an emotional wreck, those are all the things you can do. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you have other advice from the trenches for when you're in this space, Grant, which, like I was saying, is post-publication, when you're feeling like, wait, I spent however many years writing this book, and then that was it.
Yeah. Well, my other advice for authors is to keep their eye on the long game. You know, none of my books have been bestsellers, but each book has kind of gotten me to a different place that I like being in. And I just came back from this 10-day book tour in the Northwest where I did, 5 really wonderful events, and I organized this entirely by myself, and I stayed with friends and made a vacation of it. But it was primarily a book tour, and it wasn't for a new release, but my past books basically, and especially The Art of Brevity. And this kind of goes against the grain of that seasonality of books. I like to think that you don't have to obey those rules, and I've actually just started a cool series of events at my neighborhood wine store where I host tastings with Elizabeth Rossner. We had on the show to talk about her book on listening. And so Liz and I are going to go through some exercises focused on listening to wine, and then have people write tiny stories to describe the wine, so it's super cool and fun. And I don't know, this is a way for me not to feel exhaustion or the book hangover, because the book is still kind of moving through the world. So there are ways to keep the discussion of your book going. And I also just like the hopefulness of the next book. I have a few in motion that are calling me, and I learned so much from each book that I know my next one will be better in all ways.
I love that, though, because if we're going to things you can do, the other thing to do is like engage in the community. Mm-hmm. I think so often people are like, they're in their publicity campaigns and they're like trying to get all these hits, but something so small like that, like just doing something at your local wine store and getting engaged, or doing a series, it's super creative. So I can't wait to come to one.
Yeah, definitely.
It'll be fun. So all of this is just a good episode, essential to learning more about what it's like to be an author. If you've already been through it, you will still learn stuff. There is like always more to come on this journey. I think, it's the long haul, especially if you're an author for the long run. There is really nothing easy about being and becoming an author, but it's also not super easy just to like stay being an author and waiting for that next inspiration and that next book. So we have got your back. We hope that, this kind of thing keeps you inspired and gives you ideas for staying the course. And we will be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everybody.